when you look at this section there where it talks about God calling them out of Egypt, he's not telling them to leave Egypt. Hey everybody, wanted to jump into another expansion on expounding upon the power of the Bible, and I wanted to do a deep dive this time on perspective. And I wanted to focus in because our perspective of how we see things makes all of the difference. It's the whole concept of the glass half full or the glass half empty, and the positive outlook makes a big difference on life, and it also can change the way you walk towards something. And I was reading in the Old Testament, I was reading in the book of Exodus, and just to kind of go into it a little deeper, whenever you look at the original text in the Torah, which is in Exodus being a part of the Torah being in Hebrew, they don't divide up in chapters and verses like we do in English, but they do divide up in sections, which are called parshas, and then each parsha has a title. And I was looking into the parsha where it's talking about the Israelites leaving out of Egypt. And I know that for such a long time, every time you hear about Egypt, it's, running away from Egypt, getting away from slavery, escaping the Pharaoh. And when you look at the section there where it talks about God calling them out of Egypt, he's not telling them to leave Egypt, but he's telling them to come and be with him. The actual parsha name is Bo, and Bo means to come. And I think that perspective shift is a really big deal in how we approach things. Because for so long in the church, we talk about the getting away from sin, that you're escaping sin, that, getting out of the pig pen, getting out of the darkness. And as much as that is important, and that's good, but it's not the perspective that as we get deeper into things that I think we should have. Because if we look at things from, I'm running away from the bad, then it's kind of like you're driving with your focus on the rearview mirror, and you're always looking backwards instead of looking at what's ahead. And God's not calling us to run away from sin, but to come and be with him. And those other things, they just happen by osmosis. God was calling the Israelites, and he said, Bo, he said to come walk with me, O my children. By osmosis, they were able to escape slavery. They were able to get away from the chains that bound them. But it wasn't because God was calling them to run away and to be away from Egypt. God was calling them to come and to walk in his presence, to be able to experience his love, to walk into the promised land. And we see there afterwards that they got stuck in this wilderness period, not because God didn't want them to make it to the promised land, but because their perspective was still stuck in that rearview mirror looking at Exodus. They were looking at getting away and being stuck in Egypt and talking about how life was better in Egypt, how we got to be able to have this thing or that thing when they were in Egypt, instead of looking forwards to what the promise that God had for them in the promised land. And I think that perspective shift is what we need to look into today, because so much of our focus nowadays is, separating ourselves away from the sin and putting our focus to where we're looking at the things that, have bound us up in the past, instead of looking towards what God has for us. And if we change our viewpoint to our eyes focus in on what God has for us, then it's just going to happen that we're looking away from the bad things. We're getting away from the bad things. We're following in God's footsteps, and those other things, they get further and further away from us. Not because we're running away from those, but because we're running towards God. And I wanted to just give a little short video of saying, hey, God's not calling you to run away from Egypt. There's so many Egypts of our life today. I've heard so many people say that in America today is like living in Babylon, and that there's all of this evil that we need to run away from, we need to get away from. And God's not calling us to run away from all of the stuff around us. We're supposed to be in the world, but not of the world. And we get to be in the world and not of the world by being with God, by walking with him, by communing with him, And because of that, we can change things around us instead of putting our focus on the things that are around us. You can become a thermostat instead of a thermometer, where you set the environment instead of the environment setting you. And the biggest thing with that is a perspective shift. So today, instead of trying to run away from Egypt, put your focus on God. Run towards God. And as you walk towards God, everything else falls away. We can step up, rise on wings as eagles, and you get to look at things from a different perspective. The eagle's not worried about something hunting it, because the eagle is the hunter, and we become the hunters whenever we rise up with God. So after we, coming to the end of this little lesson, we'll call it, of a perspective shift, let's look towards God, and then you guys can look towards the next installment, whatever it'll be, where God leads us next on expanding upon power that we can have from the Bible and being able to take the next step in our journey with God. If you like this video, maybe share it with a friend. Look at this other video we'll have over here and wait to see what God has in store for us next. Have a good one. Bye.